deaf girl left on a bridge by her father, until a stray dog did something that changed everything. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always awesome to see how far our stories are reaching. Sophie sat cross-legged on the edge of an old abandoned bridge just outside Springfield, a small town in Oregon. Her face was red from crying, though no one had heard a sound. Sophie didn't cry out loud. Since birth, she lived in a silent world. 9 years old, skin pale as milk, light blonde hair tangled by the wind. She wore a grey wool coat, too big for her thin frame, and boots soaked inside. Next to her was a dirt-stained school backpack. She stared at the water flowing below, not like someone thinking of jumping, but like someone who no longer expected anything to change. Sophie didn't know the word for hopelessness, but she felt it. She remembered how her father told her that morning, with a sharp gesture, to wait. He drove off in his rusty truck without looking back. Sophie thought he'd return with food, or maybe an apology, but hours passed. The sun crossed the sky, and nothing changed. Now with the sunset painting the horizon grey, she just hugged her knees, unsure whether to keep waiting or simply stay there, fading into the mist. In town, no one looked for her. No one missed her. Far away, in streets of concrete and low rooftops, Buddy trotted through an alley between trash cans. He was a German shepherd with dark grey fur marked by time and neglect. He still wore an old tag around his neck. Buddy, K9 Unit. For years he'd served in Salem, helping find missing people, tracking drugs, saving lives, until an explosion damaged his left ear and caused anxiety attacks. He was declared unfit for service and sent to a shelter where no one adopted him. One night, he simply escaped. Since then, Buddy wandered the city's edges, surviving on his nose and instincts. He avoided humans. He didn't bark. He didn't beg. He just walked, as if he still had a mission to complete. That afternoon, something shifted. Buddy stopped at a fork in the path. The air carried a scent, not just river or dampness. It was soft, like a stuffed animal left out in the rain. Sadness, fear, loneliness. Buddy tilted his head, sniffed harder, and turned left toward the woods. Meanwhile, Sophie started to doze off, her face still wet with tears. The sun sank. The cold grew sharper. And the silence, that endless silence that always followed her, was deeper now. Then something warm touched her cheek. She opened her eyes wide. In front of her, a figure stood against the sky, a dog, tall with deep dark eyes. He didn't bark. He just looked at her, calm, no threat. Sophie scooted back a few inches, scared, but the dog didn't move. He licked her face again, slowly. She touched her cheek. It was dry. She froze. No human had come close like this since her mother, let alone an animal. She raised her hand and made a simple sign. Friend. Buddy tilted his head again and lay down beside her, as if he already knew her. Sophie wasn't sure if she should trust him, but she was too tired to doubt. She closed her eyes. For the first time in days, she didn't have nightmares. The girl didn't cry anymore. She just waited. The morning arrived with an ashy grey sky. Mist slid through the trees like it wanted to hide the world. Sophie opened her eyes slowly. Beside her, Buddy lay with his head on his front paws, sleeping with a calm she'd never seen in an adult, not even her mother. Buddy opened one eye. His tail twitched slightly. They didn't need words, they didn't need sounds. Sophie smiled shyly and ran her hand over his rough fur. It was the first time she'd touched anything with affection since her mother died. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Buddy stood, sniffed the air, and looked at her. She understood. She followed, without asking. They walked into the woods. Buddy went ahead, head low, alert to every sound, every shadow. Sophie followed, dodging branches, stepping on wet leaves. After a while, they reached a clearing with bushes full of berries. Sophie knelt and picked them with trembling hands. She ate eagerly, but not desperately. Buddy sat nearby, watching everything around them like her guardian. As she chewed, memories hit her, broken images of her mother, Rachel, with her light brown hair and gentle voice, moving her hands gracefully to teach signs with endless patience. Rachel baking homemade bread, brushing Sophie's hair, telling stories with her fingers. Rachel singing, even though Sophie couldn't hear, just so she could feel the vibrations on her chest and smile. Then came the memory of that cursed day, the car that didn't stop, blood on the glass, the silent scream Sophie let out from the sidewalk, the funeral, the closed casket, the hugs she didn't understand. Then, James. Her father had changed. He used to be serious, but warm. After the accident, something broke. He started drinking, yelling with rough gestures, looking at her with eyes that said he hated her. Sophie understood without words. One day he just stopped looking at her. The scene came back hard. The old truck stopping by the old mill bridge. His hand gesture, the door slamming. "Stay here." That's all he said with his lips. Then he vanished in a cloud of dust. Sophie snapped back to the present. Buddy was still watching her. He'd noticed her sadness. He came closer, pressing his head against her chest. She hugged him tightly. It was a clumsy hug, like she was afraid of breaking something. Buddy closed his eyes. They kept walking that day, with no clear direction. They crossed streams, climbed hills covered in dry leaves. Sophie felt less afraid. She started to trust. When she got tired, Buddy stopped. When dark thoughts took over, he licked her hand, reminding her she wasn't alone. At sunset, they found a small wooden hunter's cabin hidden among the trees. It was abandoned with broken windows and a sagging door. Still, it offered shelter. They went inside. Sophie cleared a corner with leaves and lay down. Buddy settled by the entrance, keeping watch. She looked at him one last time before closing her eyes. No one had ever protected her like this, not even her father. For the first time, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, someone had found her. Dawn broke with an almost unreal calm. The distant caw of crows faded into the wind. Sophie opened her eyes in the abandoned hunter's cabin. The wooden beams creaked in the cold. Buddy was still lying near the door, awake, his eyes sharp. He didn't sleep deeply. He rested with one sense alert, as if something inside him knew he had to protect. Sophie got up quietly. She walked to the door and looked out at the woods. She took a deep breath. The air smelled of wet earth, rotting leaves and freedom. Buddy came over, brushing her leg with his nose. She knelt and smiled at him. They didn't need words. It was as if they shared the same pain, the same story of being left behind, though in different languages. They spent the day exploring the woods. Sophie found a small stream not far from the cabin. She knelt and drank from her cupped hands while Buddy drank beside her. Then they gathered more berries and edible roots she remembered from books her mother used to read to her. Buddy, in his own way, seemed to know what was safe and what wasn't. If she reached for something dangerous, he gave a soft growl. If it was fine, he walked calmly. Sophie started to enjoy the silence. Not the forced silence of the town, where everyone ignored her because she didn't speak like them. This was different. The silence of the woods, where the wind spoke for her, and Buddy understood her without effort. While resting under a giant oak tree, Sophie pulled a small notebook from her backpack. It was old, with bent pages and some torn out. It was her visual diary. She drew what she couldn't say. With a chewed-up pencil, she started sketching Buddy's outline. She drew him next to her, big, strong, but with gentle eyes. Below, she wrote in childish handwriting, "My guardian." Buddy glanced at her, with that curious yet protective look only dogs have. She held up the notebook to show him. He didn't understand the words, but he got the gesture. He came closer and licked the paper. Sophie laughed silently. For the first time, a clean laugh, free of guilt or fear. The woods suddenly didn't feel like a hostile place. They felt like home. But the light began to shift. The sky grew darker, and a sharper breeze rustled the branches. Buddy tensed. He stood, sniffed the air, and turned his head east. Sophie felt it too. It wasn't just the cold. It was a restlessness, like something or someone had crossed an invisible line. They decided to head back to the cabin before night fell. On the way, Sophie found a fallen branch shaped like a stick. She picked it up, examined it. Buddy watched her. She used it like a sword from a story, playing for a few seconds. Buddy, not fully understanding, wagged his tail, joining in. In the middle of the woods, among ancient trees, a girl and a dog played as if they were the last happy beings on earth. When they reached the cabin, they built a small fire with dry branches Buddy helped gather. Sophie warmed her hands. In her backpack, she found a cereal bar that hadn't expired. She broke it in half and offered one part to Buddy. He took it gently. They shared the food like equal companions. That night, before sleeping, Sophie drew again. This time it was the woods, with her and Buddy in the center hugging. At the bottom she wrote, "Thank you for finding me." Far off, the sound of an old engine broke the quiet of the town. In a grimy roadside diner with flickering lights, James Carter drained the last of his glass. His eyes were red, not from the booze but from a bitter anger that had clung to him for months. The image of Rachel, his late wife, kept flashing in his mind, not as comfort, but as a silent accusation. James could never forgive his daughter for what he thought he'd lost. Rachel had poured her whole world into Sophie since she was born. When they found out about her deafness, Rachel didn't cry or break. She learned sign language, sought therapies, changed jobs, and taught her husband with near heavenly patience. But James didn't want to learn. He didn't want to accept that his daughter wasn't what he'd pictured. After the accident, that discomfort turned to hate. A quiet hate that wasn't shouted but felt in every gesture, every time he avoided her eyes. A burden. That's what you are, he muttered to himself over the empty glass, as if Sophie could hear him from some corner of his conscience. He paid the bill with a crumpled dollar and staggered to his truck. He started the engine. He glanced at the empty passenger seat. For a moment he saw her there, clutching her backpack to her chest. He blinked. The image vanished. He lit a cigarette and drove to the town's police station. Sheriff Tom Riley, a man with a weathered face and a deep voice, greeted him with a skeptical look. "How long has your daughter been missing?" he asked bluntly. 3 days, I think," James replied, his disinterest poorly hidden. 3 days and you didn't think to report it sooner? I thought she'd come back. Maybe went off with a friend. It's not the first time she's gone for a few hours." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. He knew James was lying. Everyone in town knew that since Rachel died, Sophie had become invisible to her father. "We'll issue an alert," Tom said finally, taking notes. "But I need more details. Where do you see her last?" James hesitated. He scratched his beard. He wanted to lie but felt watched. "At the old mill bridge by the river road." Tom stared at him, unblinking. "You left her there alone?" "Just for a moment. I got distracted. When I came back, she was gone." The sheriff wrote it down, saying nothing more. Then he stepped out and told an officer to check cameras in the area, though he knew there were none on that stretch. He also ordered something else. Visit the diner where James often drank and talked to Sherman Brooks, an old lumberjack who lived near the woods and saw things others didn't. That night James went home. He opened the door slowly. The silence was thick, painful. He flipped on the hallway light. On the shelf was a photo. Rachel holding Sophie and himself, younger, cleaner, more human. He picked up the photo. He looked at those blue eyes, just like Sophie's. He felt a pang. Something stirred inside, but he couldn't tell if it was guilt or just an echo of the past. He tossed the photo into a drawer and slammed it shut. Miles away, in the hunter's cabin in the woods, Sophie slept, hugging Buddy. Outside, the moon rose like a witness. Buddy's eyes snapped open. His damaged ear caught a distant crack, out of place with the forest's rhythm. He lifted his head and sniffed the air. Something, or someone, was close. Buddy didn't bark. He stood and placed himself in front of the door, silent. Sophie didn't wake. She kept breathing softly, her face calm like someone who'd finally found a safe corner. But that peace wouldn't last long. The morning sun barely broke through the treetops when Sherman Brooks stepped out of his cabin with a steaming mug of coffee. He'd lived alone in the woods around Springfield, Oregon for over 30 years. His white hair and scruffy beard contrasted with his sharp, ice-blue eyes. He was a man of few words, but saw everything. He walked slowly toward the woodshed, dragging his feet through dry leaves. Suddenly he stopped. Something in the air had shifted. A different smell. Smoke, not from his chimney, but fainter, like a makeshift campfire. He frowned, set the mug on a stump, and grabbed his shotgun for caution. He followed the scent, moving with steady, quiet steps. About 500 yards from his cabin, he spotted an old structure. He knew it, a hunter's cabin, empty for years. He approached carefully. Through a crack, he saw movement. Buddy noticed him first. He stood, body tense, and let out a low, barely audible growl, positioning himself between the door and Sophie, who was still curled up asleep in a corner. The old lumberjack saw him and lowered his gun at once. "Well, you're no ordinary dog," he muttered. Buddy didn't back down, his eyes locked on the man. Sophie woke, sensing the change. She saw the stranger and jolted back, her face pale with fear. Sherman raised his hands in peace. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said slowly, knowing she couldn't hear. Then he noticed something. Her gestures, her movements, how she touched her neck before trying to communicate. He understood. "You're deaf," he whispered. Sophie read lips with difficulty, but something in his face felt safe. Still, she didn't approach. Buddy stayed tense. It was Sophie who, with a firm gesture, stepped in front of the dog and held out her hand, signaling the man wasn't a threat. Sherman nodded and took a step back. "I'm Sherman. I live nearby," he said, pointing. "If you want, you can come with me. There's hot food, clean water." Sophie hesitated. She looked at Buddy. He lowered his head slightly, as if giving approval. Hours later, the three sat in Sherman's cabin kitchen. Sophie devoured a bowl of hot soup. Buddy, at her feet, ate pieces of dried meat Sherman kept for winter. The silence was comfortable, no tension. Sherman watched them with a mix of warmth and curiosity. He saw their bond. It was more than companionship, it was survival. That afternoon, Sherman checked Buddy's tag. He read it aloud. "K9 unit. Buddy." He thought for a moment. Then he went to his living room, dug through old papers and pulled out a worn card. He dialed a number. "Sergeant Hayes? It's Sherman Brooks. I found someone you might know." The fireplace crackled in Sherman's cabin. Its warmth was different from the woods. Human. Sophie sat in a big armchair that seemed to hug her, staring at the fire as if trying to read its shapes. Buddy lay curled at her feet, not fully asleep. His ears twitched now and then, as if some part of his memory wouldn't let him fully trust. Sherman watched from the kitchen. He'd made chamomile tea and set out a small tray of oatmeal cookies. He offered them with a gentle smile. Sophie took one, looked him in the eyes and with effort signed one word. "Thanks." Sherman didn't fully understand, but that gesture, that word, cracked something in his chest. He'd seen hurt kids before, but never one so quiet, so contained, so old inside. "Your mom would be proud of you," he said softly, more to himself than to her. Sophie looked down. She pulled out her sketchbook and set it on the table. She opened it to a page with the woods, the hunter's cabin, Buddy and herself in the center. Then she wrote carefully, "Who are you?" Sherman read it. He smiled. "I'm Sherman. I was friends with your mom years ago. We used to fish with your grandpa. The woods were different then. Everything was slower, clearer." Sophie nodded slightly. The place felt less strange suddenly. She signed again. "Where's Buddy really from?" Sherman half understood. He picked up Buddy's tag from the shelf and held it up. "He was a hero, you know. Worked with the police for years. Found lost people, caught criminals, saved lives. But one day an explosion in a mission hurt his ear. After that they called him useless. Sent him to a shelter where no one wanted him." Sophie frowned, like she couldn't grasp why something so brave could end up like that. "But he escaped," Sherman said, "and now he's with you. I guess you two were looking for each other." That evening, just after sunset, an old car with dim lights pulled up to the cabin. A tall man about 50 in a navy blue uniform stepped out. Officer Michael Hayes. Sherman met him at the door. They shook hands firmly. "Where is he?" Michael asked, straight to the point. "Inside, but he's not alone." They went in. Buddy lifted his head the moment he sensed the man. He stood slowly. He knew that smell, that presence. Sophie looked confused. Buddy walked toward Michael cautiously. When he was a few feet away, he stopped. Michael knelt. "Hey, old friend. Thought I'd never see you again." Buddy took a step, then another. Finally, he pressed his head against Michael's chest. Michael closed his eyes and hugged him like a brother he thought was gone. Sophie watched, unmoving. She didn't fully understand, but she felt the emotion. Michael turned to her. He spoke slowly, clearly. "Thank you for taking care of him." Sophie didn't answer with words. She lifted her sketchbook. She drew a heart and wrote inside it, "He saved me." Michael read it. His eyes filled with tears. Sherman left them alone. He looked out the window. The night fell with a peace he almost feared to break. Morning mist settled over the woods like a damp sheet. Leaves crunched under the leather boots of Travis Boone, a local hunter with a weathered face, messy blonde beard, and eyes sharp as an axe blade. He walked steadily, rifle slung over his back, a light pack on his shoulders. He wasn't friends with anyone in town, but he took money when offered, and James Carter had paid well. A skinny blonde girl with a kid's backpack, James had told him 2 days earlier. Maybe with a big dog, German Shepherd. "If you see them, call me. That's it." Travis didn't ask questions. He didn't care about other people's reasons. Just track, find, and get paid. That morning on the wet trail, He spotted fresh tracks, small, with improper shoes. A kid's. Beside them, deeper marks. A big dog's paws. He stopped. Dead silence. Then a faint sound. Muffled laughter. Two tones. One silent, the other deep, slow. He adjusted his binoculars and saw them through the trees. Sophie was playing on a rope swing Sherman had rigged between two oaks. Buddy trotted nearby, a stick in his mouth. Michael sat on a log jotting notes in a notebook. Sherman split wood with mechanical precision. Travis took out his phone, snapped a distant photo without zooming, and left unseen. Half an hour later, his old SUV was parked outside James's house. "Where?" James asked, eager, stepping out with his shirt unbuttoned and sour breath. "Old Hunter's cabin near the South Creek. They're not hiding. They're not scared," Travis said, flat. James went quiet for a second. Then, with a look mixing anger and resolve, he flicked his cigarette butt to the ground and crushed it with his boot. "Thanks," he said. Travis didn't reply. He got in his SUV and drove off, kicking up dust. James went inside. He changed clothes, washed his face in the bathroom sink, and stared at himself in the mirror for a long time. His eyes were dull, no trace of regret. He dug through a drawer for his father's old rusty pistol. He loaded it slowly. This wasn't just a visit, it was a choice. By late afternoon, the air grew heavy at Sherman's cabin. Buddy paced in circles by the door, fur bristling. Michael noticed the change. "What's wrong, Buddy?" he asked, standing. Sophie, sitting on the rug by the fire, felt it too. Buddy came to her, sniffed her hands, then moved to the window. He growled. Sherman looked at Michael. "He senses things before they happen. Always has." Michael nodded. He walked to the door and opened it. The woods were still. Too still. "I'll check around," he said, grabbing his flashlight. Sherman took his shotgun just in case. Sophie stepped to the window. Buddy stayed by her side. Deep in the woods, hidden among trees, James watched. He held the pistol, trembling in his hands. His gaze was cold, but his body sweated. He wasn't a killer. Not yet. But hate could push harder than any gun. That night, the calm broke. Darkness fell like a heavy curtain over the woods. No crickets chirped. No trees rustled. It was a silence born not of rest, but of fear. Buddy stood still by the door, body tense, ears up, wet nose quivering as he held back a growl. Sophie, though deaf, sensed it. Her breaths grew short. She stood, walked to Sherman and tugged his sleeve. She signed quickly. "Is someone coming?" Sherman didn't answer. He grabbed the shotgun from the corner, loaded it with steady, aged hands. Michael, back from checking outside, rushed in. "Nothing out there, but he knows something. I trust Buddy more than any alarm." Michael turned off the living room lights. Sherman closed all the windows. Sophie crouched by the couch, and Buddy stood in front of her. No one spoke. Only the creak of a porch board broke the quiet. A hard thud hit the silence, the back door. Michael ran toward the kitchen, but before he got there, another louder thud came from the front door. Sherman aimed. Buddy barked for the first time since entering the woods, a deep warning sound. "Sophie, get out here!" A broken, alcohol-soaked voice full of hate cut through the wood. "I told you to stay where I left you. Come out now." Sophie froze. She knew that voice too well. Her legs shook. It wasn't just fear. It was an old, deep terror shaped like her father. James outside pounded the door with his fist, then the butt of his pistol. He shouted nonsense. He didn't ask. He didn't beg. He demanded. "She's not yours," Michael yelled from inside. "You left her, abandoned her," James answered with a shot into the air. The blast was sharp, brutal. Sophie covered her ears by reflex, though she couldn't hear. Buddy lunged at the door, clawing the wood like he wanted to break through. His whole body shook with rage and protection. Sherman circled the cabin and slipped out a side door. He knew how to move in shadows. Meanwhile, James kept trying to force the lock, yelling slurs, his words more erratic. He didn't want to take Sophie back. He wanted to punish her, to get revenge for the pain she reminded him of. Inside, Michael put Sophie behind a table, keeping her safe. He touched her shoulder, looked in her eyes, and mouthed, "It's going to be okay." Sophie nodded, though tears soaked her face. Buddy stayed in front of her, teeth bared, muscles tight, tail low. Then, a crack from behind. James had circled the cabin. He shoved open a window and stuck his armed hand inside. He fired blindly. The shot shattered a lamp. Buddy leaped. The noise made him flinch, but he didn't run. He charged the window with a fury born of love. At that moment, Sherman appeared behind James, shoving him hard to the ground. The pistol flew a few yards. Buddy bolted through the now open door. He didn't wait for orders. He didn't think. He ran. He jumped on James before he could get up, pinning him with his front paws on his chest, not biting yet. James struggled, but Buddy was pure will. Sophie appeared at the door. She didn't scream. She couldn't. She just looked. Sherman grabbed the pistol and aimed. Michael arrived seconds later and cuffed James with quick moves. James's face was covered in dirt and shame. He said nothing. He just stared at his daughter with a mix of anger and defeat. Sophie walked to Buddy. She hugged him. The dog finally relaxed. His job was done. That night, the cabin went quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This wasn't fear. It was justice. 2 days later, Sherman's cabin felt different. No more locked windows or tension in the air. The woods breathed their usual rhythm. Sophie sat on the porch, legs dangling, sketchbook on her lap. She drew with slow, thoughtful strokes. Beside her, Buddy slept deeply, his body fully at ease, like he could finally rest without worry. Officer Michael Hayes arrived early that morning. He carried a folder of papers and a serious look. Sherman greeted him with a silent handshake, followed by a glance that said more than words. "Everything's set," Michael said quietly. The judge signed the order. "James has been charged. Abandonment, armed threat, attempted kidnapping. He's in custody while the case moves forward." Sherman nodded. He didn't ask more. "And about Sophie's custody," Michael added. "The state will grant it temporarily to a responsible adult while her legal status is sorted." He paused, pulled out a paper, and handed it to Sherman. "She mentioned you. Said she feels safe with you. She didn't say it out loud, but she wrote it in her notebook." Sherman read the paper. For the first time in years, his hands shook. It wasn't fear. It was an old, almost forgotten feeling. He looked at Sophie from the doorway. She looked up and smiled, a shy, broken, but bright smile. "I'll do it," he said without hesitation. That afternoon, Sherman took her to town for a checkup. Sophie had no physical injuries, but the doctor was clear. Her emotional trauma was deep. It would take time, patience, and a place that didn't try to fix her, but just loved her as she was. At the hospital, reporters waited. The story of the police dog who saved a girl had leaked. Michael tried to keep the media at bay, but one photo went viral. Sophie leaving the hospital with Buddy at her side, her hand on his head, and a word written on the cast on his leg: "Hero." That night, back at the cabin, Sophie drew again. This time, it was her mother in the sky, arms reaching down. Below her and Buddy hugging. In the corner, Sherman. Tell me in the comments, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story so far? Your opinion means a lot to me. With a coffee mug and a calm face. When she finished, she showed it to Sherman. He looked at it for a long time, then hugged her tightly, saying nothing. Sophie let herself be hugged. She didn't tense. She didn't pull away. She closed her eyes. The next day, at the town's police station, Sheriff Tom took Michael's formal statement. He also signed the case report, detailing Buddy's role in saving the girl. At the bottom, in his rough handwriting, he added a personal note. "Not all heroes wear uniforms. Some just need a heart that doesn't quit." That same night, Buddy got a symbolic award from the county police department. Michael stood before a small crowd of neighbors, clapping respectfully. Sophie was among them, in a blue jacket with a white flower in her hair. Buddy didn't understand the honor. He only understood Sophie's scent. To him, that scent was home. A soft breeze blew over the Clearwater River. Fallen leaves danced along the dirt path leading to the old concrete bridge where it all started. The sunset painted the sky in amber and lavender. Sophie walked slowly, with a new calm, wearing a red coat that reached her knees. Beside her, Buddy, steady, graceful, like a protective shadow. Sherman followed a few steps behind, hands in his pockets, a folded blanket under his arm. He'd insisted on coming, though he knew this moment was more theirs than his. At the bridge's center, Sophie stopped. She looked down at the water, not with fear, with memory. She recalled her body curled against the railing, her silent tears, her loneliness so deep it seemed endless. Then she looked at Buddy. He looked back, as if he knew exactly what she felt. She knelt, pulled her sketchbook from her backpack. With steady hands, she tore out a page. It was the first drawing she'd made in the hunter's cabin, her sitting on the ground, Buddy licking her tears. She held it a moment, kissed it softly, and let it fall to the river. The paper floated briefly before disappearing. Sherman came closer. He spread the blanket on the ground. The three sat together, watching the horizon. Sophie pulled out her notebook again and wrote slowly with a pencil. When she finished, she handed it to Sherman. The page read, "The world let me go, but he held me." Sherman swallowed hard. His eyes blurred. "Yeah, little one," he whispered. "And you saved him too. You found each other right where it hurt most." Buddy lay across Sophie's legs. She stroked his neck gently. She looked at the scar behind his left ear. It was ugly, jagged, but to her it was a symbol of courage, of loyalty, of a miracle. After a few minutes, Sophie stood. She walked to the railing and with white chalk wrote something on the weathered concrete. Big, uneven letters, but full of truth. Family isn't who has you, it's who doesn't let you go. Then she lowered her head, placed her hand on Buddy's chest, and smiled. "Let's go home," she signed. Buddy understood. He wagged his tail and started walking. As they moved down the path, the sky darkened. Sherman watched them walk ahead, side by side, with the woods as a backdrop. The silence around wasn't empty. It was full of promise, of faith, of beginnings. A narrator's voice at the end came like a whisper. "Even if the world abandons you, a noble soul can always find you." 6 months passed since that afternoon on the bridge. Spring arrived in Greenwood County with wildflowers, green buds on trees, and longer days. Life, like the woods, began to bloom again. Sophie now lived officially with Sherman Brooks. The judge signed the adoption papers after a short but deeply moving hearing. Michael's report, along with statements from Sheriff Tom and several neighbors, made it clear that Sophie wasn't just rescued. She was welcomed, loved, and protected like never before. Sherman fixed up his cabin with ramps, new windows, and a bright room for Sophie. He learned sign language with the same patience Rachel once practiced in front of a mirror. He made mistakes at first, but Sophie smiled every time he tried. In time, they understood each other effortlessly. Words in that house were never the most important thing. Buddy stayed her guardian. He no longer patrolled woods or faced threats, but he checked the cabin every night, slept by the door, and followed Sophie's every step. In town, people greeted him like an old, wise man. Some called him the four-legged angel. Michael went back to Salem but kept in touch. He visited every 2 weeks, bringing books, puzzles, and cookies. On one visit, he gave Buddy a new tag. Not a police one, but with a single word: family. James Carter was sentenced to 3 years in prison with mandatory therapy. He never asked to see Sophie, and she never asked about him. She'd learned some absences didn't hurt because they made room for something better. Sophie started at a small school for deaf children in Springfield. She made new friends, but everyone knew her best friend had 4 legs, deep eyes, and a gift for seeing what no one else could. In her sketchbook, now full of drawings, the last page had big letters. "My mom loved me, my dad forgot me, but life brought me Buddy, and with him, I found myself." Sophie and Buddy's story didn't end on a bridge or in a courtroom. It goes on every day, in small gestures. A pat, a walk in the rain, a shared smile in silence. Because sometimes, when all seems lost, life throws you a rope from the unlikeliest place. And sometimes, that rope has paws, scars, and a heart big enough to hold the whole world. Thank you so much for sticking with this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a ton and motivates us to keep bringing new stories every week. And since you're here, take a moment to check out another one of our stories that's popping up on your screen. Big hug and see you next time. Stay well.